Welcome to today's Tech Talk. I am Colleen Diaz. I am the manager of user research here at DigitalOcean, and today we're going to talk about how to position your idea with user research. Before we get started, I just want to say that DO also has an awesome playlist with other design related talks, so be sure to check those out as well. So before we get started, I just want to cover a quick summary of, what we're going to talk about today. We are going to chat about some easy research techniques for when you encounter some common product development scenarios, such as maybe you're not sure who your target users are. Maybe you've been trying to do user research, but you're not getting any consistent feedback. Maybe you need to prioritize the right features before you build. Or perhaps you did some research, you thought everything was going well, but your adoption was lower than you expected when you launched. We'll also talk about some tips for making sense of your research data. And also, if time permits, we'll chat about a couple of advanced research methods for some scenarios you might encounter later on, such as how to use quality metrics to iterate and determine when your product is ready to launch, and how to innovate and to differentiate your product or your potential product from competitors. So I mentioned there are some other design talks. Just want to do a little promotion for these guys. So if you haven't seen these other videos, I'm not going to go into really what these cover, but we do have some great content about painless and efficient ways to do usability testing. We also, have a great talk about moving from an MVP to a MLP, minimum lovable product, and building what your customers care about. So be sure to check those out as well. Before I also dive into the research related stuff, I think it helps to get a sense of where does user experience research sit in the larger scheme of things. So, if we take a look at research as a whole, you see there's a lot of overlap with a lot of other areas related to UX, design, usability engineering, information architecture, content strategy, etc. You know, in user research, we actually, a lot of our techniques borrow from other fields such as anthropology, psychology, library science, journalism. There's a huge list, and we're always developing new techniques and borrowing from these other disciplines. So what are some common scenarios where user research can actually help you? Let's say, number one, I hear this pretty frequently from folks. You have a startup idea, but you're not sure who your target users are. Research can help with this. The problem from a research perspective is that you haven't yet done any validation of your product market fit or your value prop. So some research related solutions for this would be that, you need to understand your customer needs with qualitative in-depth interviews or with field research. You also, probably want to validate your product ideas with some form of concept testing or contextual inquiry. So what is field research? What do I mean by that? I would say that there is no substitute for field research, for really getting out into the field and understanding, customers and potential customers' real life scenarios and the context for how they would naturally use your product or any other product. So field research can really show you how people behave in the environment where they either live or work. It does give you a sense of what people are saying about your product, and it is qualitative feedback. It is direct feedback specifically about your product and how they might or are, trying to use it. These are just a couple of photos from some of our previous field research efforts at DigitalOcean, and You can see like we've gone out into the field to see where our customers are working, whether that's in an office at the bottom or whether that's actually, working from a coffee shop up top. So, this gives you and your team and the designers on your team and the product managers on your team a really good sense of these are real people who are using your products. We also do a lot of in-depth interviews, and these are really great for getting a sense of what people say. This is attitudinal data. It is also qualitative. It is direct feedback about your product or your brand, although it can be more decontextualized. So, if you're not combining this with another method like usability testing, people are not using your product necessarily as you're speaking with them. The great thing about in-depth interviews, though, is that you can conduct them remotely or in person. And this is a photo of one of our UX designers actually conducting an in-depth interview from our research lab in the DigitalOcean office. I also mentioned concept testing. So concept testing, is really can give you a sense of what people might say about your product, what their attitudes or perceptions would be about your idea. And it can also be sort of a hybrid combination of both qualitative and quantitative data. It's typically delivered in a survey format, and there are a number of vendors out there that will help you with concept testing. And just on the right here, you can get a sense of what a concept testing report might look like in terms of the appeal of your product, the initial reaction, and customer or potential customers' likability. But let's say that maybe your scenario that you've been dealing with is that you have been talking to customers or potential users, but you're not getting consistent feedback. This is also, a common research problem that I've heard from other folks. In this case, I would say, it sounds like you don't have enough data, or you haven't collected enough data, or you're not asking the right questions. So the solution for this is really, do more user research until you see patterns. And when I say that, I mean that, qualitatively, a pattern would be 3 or more times that you are observing the same behavior or attitude or perception of a potential customer. You might also want to try different research methods to see if you can get clearer answers to the problem that you're trying to solve. But you might be asking, Colleen, I don't understand I don't know enough about research methods. So I would say that this is a good way of trying to gauge which method you might want to use for user research. This is a chart that I've adapted from a Nielsen Norman Group chart from 2014. And really it's showing you, based on what you're trying to learn, that can help determine how you get the answers to your questions. So if you are looking to understand, what people are doing with your product, and you want to know how many people are doing something particular with your product, then A/B testing or web analytics is probably a great tool for you to use to get that information. But let's say instead that you actually want to know what people are saying about your product, and how to fix potential problems with it. Then I would say in-depth interviews or focus groups might be better methods for you in that case. On to another scenario. So in real life scenario number 3, let's say you got a minimum viable product, an MVP, and it's actually doing really well. But now your team is arguing about which features to build next, and they don't know how to move forward. Research can help with this too. So this research problem, you're really trying to understand and build the features that your target customers not just like, but also expect and need. So a great solution for this that we actually use here at DO is the Kano model to prioritize potential features. So the Kano model was developed by a researcher back in the early 80s. He was trying to figure out how to sort of marry both the concept of functionality with satisfaction. And he came up with this questionnaire format that is still being used today. So it's actually, it is what people are saying about your product. So it is attitudinal data, but it's combining both the feature's function or importance of that feature with the expected satisfaction that customers are expecting to get out of it before that feature exists. It is delivered in a survey format typically, but it's a great way of understanding which features for your product are must-be or must-have features versus which are, attractive features and which are really just indifferent to potential customers or your best customers. So it's a really good tool. This is an example of how maybe the results might look. This is one that we ran here at DigitalOcean. So it's really important for the Kano model that you use context and scenarios instead of industry jargon when you're posing the questions. One thing that we've noticed is that, if customers or potential customers don't understand what the concept is or what the feature really is, because it's not well described, they tend to rank it as indifferent because they don't understand it or they don't know it. So like here in this example, I think feature 15 was probably one that was, not as well described since folks were pretty indifferent to the value of the feature. For each feature, you want to ask 2 questions per feature. So you want to ask, how would you feel if this feature existed? And how would you feel if this feature did not exist? And the scale is a 5-point scale, and it's in terms of, people liking things, expecting things, being indifferent or not caring, to all the way to, like being dissatisfied if the feature existed. What you want to do is you want to prioritize those features that are rated as must be or must have, as well as performance. And when I say performance, what we mean is that that's a feature that your customers both expect in terms of functionality, but they also like it. So it can also provide satisfaction and delight. And also you want to analyze this data and run these surveys according to different segments that might be important to your business. So that in your case, that might be either a high spend user or it might be really an early adopter. So you should actually look at this data in that context because the answers will be different for the prioritization. So here's another real life scenario. Number 4, let's say you just launched your product. You did some research early on. Your initial survey results said that people would like and buy your product, but the adoption was lower than you expected. Research can help with this too. So in this problem, the concept, your concept is good, but either you're not building the right thing or you're not marketing, for users' real world scenarios. So there are a couple of research solutions for this. I would say one, good one is to run like split tests or A/B tests by your different segments, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. The other is that you can conduct jobs to be done research for understanding your customers' real world scenarios about why they've actually hired a solution, including your solution. So in terms of split tests and experiments, I actually came across this at a former startup I worked at where, we had done qualitative research and interviews, and we knew that this brand new product that we were going to launch, was something that our customers needed. But then when we rolled out, sort of a sign up page, we were not getting any signups. So we had a person on the team who was like an SEO expert and superstar marketing person who proposed, why don't we actually do a landing page split test, and on each landing page, the only difference were two different value propositions for the new product. So we did that, we rolled it out, and it was actually really effective because we saw that one of the value propositions for the product was much stronger than the other one was. And so then we were able to better understand our customers' motivations for using this new product. So it was actually pretty successful. So when you do run a split test, this does give you a good sense of the natural use of your product, and it is quantitative feedback. So it's indirect feedback. People are not directly telling you what they're thinking about, your experience or your product, but they are showing you with their behavior, how they will react to either the messaging on your site or very particular features, interacting with particular features. A/B testing or multivariate testing is really great for answering how often or how many customers are doing a particular thing, but it doesn't give you much information about why. But I do think that the example of like combining this with different value props in a landing page test was pretty helpful for us. I also mentioned jobs to be done. This is a very common method that we have used here at DigitalOcean, and it's a really great way for understanding the real world scenarios that your customers are going through. So these essentially are mental model interviews that are capturing users' own words. So it is qualitative data. And, we ask customers about their worst case scenarios as well as their ideal situations related to why they actually hire solutions. And these jobs, I should say, these techniques are pulled together from a number of different sources related to like outcome-driven innovation and jobs to be done. But when we talk to customers, we get an understanding of their decision making across an entire timeline of using, a particular solution. So we look at, what is the very first thought that someone had when they realized that they needed a solution? How did they go about looking for that solution? What was the experience like when they used it? How satisfied were they with it afterwards? And this information can be written according to this jobs to be done format. So if you look at the bottom graphic there, when I'm whatever the situation is, I want to, and that's really the core functional job that the customer is hiring your company or your solution to do for them. It's essentially their motivation. And then finally, it's written with so I can, and that is typically an expected outcome or a desire. We call this a desired outcome. And it's how customers are measuring the progress or improvement, how they're measuring the success essentially of your particular solution. So you can write these jobs across the entire customer journey. And this actually helps product teams innovate, as they are building new products, because there's not necessarily just one solution that solves a customer's job to be done. But if you understand why they're hiring you, why they're hiring your product or your feature, then it really gives you a good sense of why they're choosing your brand over competitors. So at this point, you might be thinking, how do I make sense of all this data? I've gone out and talked to customers, we've done some field research. Like, what am I supposed to do with all this data that we're collecting? So I would say that, the key to making sense of your user research data is to think about it in two stages. The first stage is really analysis, and that's, taking all of these different pieces that you've collected and breaking up bigger concepts into those smaller pieces to study each part of the problem separately. So essentially, this is called reductionism. You're reducing the information into parts, and you're focusing on, the problem, that's being illustrated by your data. So a good way to think about this is like, Lego pieces. These are the different components of your data that you're taking a look at. After you've done all of the analysis of your data, then you would think about synthesizing it. And synthesis is really combining those different analyzed parts into like a new cohesive understanding of the whole picture, the big picture. This always comes after analysis, and synthesis is also more about storytelling. So it's not just problem focused, but it's also focused on the solution. So you can actually see, after you've broken things down into those miniature Lego parts, like there is a big picture here that you can put together with the different pieces. So one way of analyzing and prioritizing user feedback is by quality or by theme. So on the right here, we have a good example from one of our projects at DigitalOcean of an affinity mapping exercise that we did for one of our studies. And affinity mapping is essentially you are taking each piece of data or each idea that you came across in your user research, and you put down like one idea or one quotation from a customer per post-it note. You can do this virtually. This is actually a screenshot from a virtual tool that we use called Miro. We also use a tool called Mural. These are online tools for collaboration. But you can also do this really simply, like on real life, in real life post-its on a whiteboard. So once you've got, the team has put down a whole lot of ideas on post-its, then, together as a group, you can come together and look for higher level themes and group those post-its together. So you're sort of like moving post-its around the board according to what makes sense in terms of the feedback that you've received about your product. And once you've done that and you've seen sort of what those themes are, you probably want to label them. So in this case, with the sort of like teal aqua colored larger name category post-its, we've written those categories on there so that when we come back to the board, we see, okay, this is what this higher level theme was. Word clouds are also a great way of analyzing user feedback. They can be a little tricky just because they're showing you sort of like how often or how frequently customers use a particular word in their feedback. It doesn't really give you a sense of context, but it can be useful as like an initial step when you're trying to analyze a lot of qualitative or unstructured data. Customer support tickets are also a great way to do this, either grouping them by feature or by product. And prioritization matrix is another good tool. You can look at qualitative data according to whether it's, let's say like has more is a higher priority for your business versus like what has the most impact for your customers. It's just a way of sort of grouping themes and qualitative data in a way that's more important or more useful for your team or your business. You can also, even at a more granular level, you can analyze user feedback according to specific quotations in customers' own words. So We occasionally will, have transcripts for some of our user interviews, and you can actually analyze, the individual words that people are using when they speak. So action words obviously would be a verb. We find that feelings are expressed as adjectives. Thoughts are phrased as, questions. So if somebody is asking a question, generally that's what they're thinking. Um, Pain points might start with a gerund, but also we find that if someone uses like a curse word, that tends to be something that is a bit painful for them in their experience. So you can get a sense of, like how people are thinking and how to analyze some of this feedback as you're like speaking with someone or listening to someone. Let's not forget that you can also analyze user feedback by quantity. The number of customer support tickets, I think, can give you a great sense of priority. If you have, the majority of your customers are having trouble with one particular issue, that's something you would want to prioritize or fix, faster than others. Um, you can also look at things according to what's most valuable, what's important for your most valuable customers. This is like following the 80-20 rule. This can be a little tricky if your most valuable customers don't represent the rest of your customer base. Then you might be prioritizing things that don't fit everyone else or don't solve other people's problems. So I would say be aware of that. You can also look at funnel analysis or engagement analytics to understand what the priority might be. This is a great way of using quantitative data for that. And then I've also listed here pivot tables, which you can use in Excel or different spreadsheets. Because I think sometimes folks forget that especially if they're newer to data analysis, they're not as aware that they can slice or segment data, in a way that shows them more meaning. The ideal way for doing this is by both quality and quantity. So one thing you could do is you can run a task analysis across your customer journey. You can also analyze usability issues according to both severity and frequency. So on the right here, I'm just showing this is like from one of our data capture spreadsheets, like from a usability study. We had 10 participants, and so we're essentially capturing, for each participant, the frequency that a particular usability issue was encountered. And then it's been additionally rated or ranked by the team and the moderator for the study according to severity. And, the worst severity would be a critical issue that is essentially blocking a user from accomplishing their task. And it can go all the way to, something like not nearly as critical, or severe, or something that might be cosmetic, which might not even be a usability issue at all. So would be much lower priority. You can also take a look at engagement analytics for important workflows, and you can also look at usability issues for those important workflows as well. So once you've done all this analysis, then what? So then you might be thinking, okay, well, now I've got to synthesize this stuff, and how do I do that? I mean, when we think about synthesis, it really is actionable. It should be actionable, and it is storytelling. So you're putting meaning behind all of that analysis that you've already done, and you're not just looking at the problem anymore. You're looking at the problem plus the solution from the customer's perspective. So essentially, you're trying to answer this question that every customer is always asking about every product or, experience that they use. How will your product or your app make my life better? There are some tools that can help aid in synthesis or interpretation or this concept of storytelling. These are some common ones we use at DigitalOcean. customer journey maps, where you are mapping a customer's experience or a group of customers' experience, you know, from the very first time they interact with your product all the way till, the end of their engagement with your brand. Um, and you're mapping not just what's happening for them at each journey stage, but you're also mapping like what do they think about it, how do they feel about it, what are perhaps like the types of customer support tickets that they're booking, or having issues with, at those different stages. A mental model diagram is also something that we use as well to understand how people are making decisions or how they go about accomplishing different tasks on our platform. It can give you a sense of, just not just what people are doing, but what they're thinking as they're using your product experience. An empathy map, this is also something that we use with customers as well as we're going through interviews. The team will actually put together an empathy map as they're observing interviews. And so you're compiling information about like what do customers say versus what do they do, think, what are we observing them feeling as they're interacting with our product. User flow diagrams, also a great way to understand the entire process or the entire flow of a customer's journey, like understanding like what are those key decision points in the customer's journey where they actually have to split and make a decision. And then you can follow those decision points. This gives you a sense of like the overall flow of the experience. Personas, also a great way of personifying, a large group of people or a category of people who are using your products. There are lots of different ways to do personas. I would say the key thing to understand is that it's a tool for empathy for your team, for helping your engineering team or your product team to understand that there are real people who are using your products. Personas don't always, they tend to be a little static, so they don't always help you understand particular scenarios of use of your product, and jobs to be done is actually a better tool for that. So you would probably want to combine both personas and jobs to be done. Jobs to be done are giving you a sense of like what is the context that people are, context of use that people are using your product for. What are they hiring your company or your product to do for them? So if we think about this a little differently, on the left here, we have an example of like an analysis report that you might see, based on some engagement metrics or analytics, web analytics. So there are three parts here. One, let's say conversion rates dipped 40% in January. Two, the average time on the checkout page also increased by 3 seconds. Three, let's say the design team changed the hero image on the website homepage on November 25th. So from this analysis or from this report, you might assume that these three things are connected, that there is a story here. And, there was a former company, or the company I used to formerly work at, we did have a very similar analysis, for one season when we were looking at some of our data. But we also conducted user interviews, around that time to figure out like what was really happening here with our customer experience. And what we heard was sort of the real story, from our qualitative research was that, during those interviews in January, people told us that they were burned out and broke from holiday shopping, and that actually resulted in the 40% lower conversions. Those people that did complete their purchases actually hesitated because they weren't sure which, styles would be in for spring. And that was evidenced by the 3-second increase in time on the checkout page. And honestly, no one cared that the homepage hero image had changed. So this is a great way of understanding that, it is important to combine, your qualitative research with quantitative data to really get a sense of the holistic story of what's really happening for your product. Otherwise, you can guess at what's really happening, but you might be wrong. So, what are some advanced user research techniques that you might want to use, and like when would you use these? So here's another real life scenario for you, and this is one that I've frequently heard from product teams in the past. Let's say that your team, was under a deadline or timeline, and they needed to launch by a certain time, and they compromised on the quality of the experience to meet that launch. But now customers are complaining because the experience is not what we promised or not what we advertised it would be. Um, as a research problem, essentially the quality here was not defined as a success metric or as a milestone in the roadmap. And this is something, most product teams or engineering teams, I think, come across in hindsight. They're under so much pressure from the business or from your finance team, because there's revenue projections that are dependent upon your product launching or your release getting out into the world. There are a couple of ways research wise that you can help with this. The first, pretty simply, is usability testing your customer workflows, even doing lean validation. I'm not going to go into detail about that because other folks from DO have actually done those talks. Like Rafa has a great talk about painless and efficient ways to do usability testing. So I'd say go watch his talk if you want more info about that. But a more advanced research method you could use is to test and iterate against your launch readiness metrics. And what do I mean by that? So launch readiness metrics really, you can put these together in different ways. They can be task based, based on like the most common user tasks for your product or your feature. They could be feature based. Maybe, it's a particular aspect of your product. It could be, the search bar. It could be the like visual design aspect of the page layout. It could be the navigation, or it could be attribute based. You might want to put together launch readiness metrics for the perception of trust and credibility that your product has, or accessibility. So there's lots of flexibility in how you determine launch readiness, but what's most important is that your team determines what those most important things are in advance before you launch. The other thing to do is to incorporate this testing into your roadmap for launch. So to make sure you have enough time to actually test your product with subject matter experts internally, or actual customers or actual users, and measure those quality scores. So what you would do is you would test and then have your team iterate until the average scores improve enough to meet whatever your predetermined benchmarks are. Maybe for you, like for your product, you just want to say that, like, okay, average trust and credibility for our product is good enough, and as long as we meet that, we're ready to go. But maybe for whatever you're launching, maybe that's not good enough. Maybe it needs to be above average. So your team needs to figure that out in advance and make sure that you are delivering the right level of quality. Using launch readiness metrics, I think, is also a great tool because it allows your team to actually launch with confidence that your product or your feature is both usable, but it also meets, a certain level of customer satisfaction as they're interacting with it or as they're using it. Um, just another example of how these are some scores from a project where we use sort of the task-based metrics. And those task-based metrics, I've got some, on the lower right illustrated here. They could be, task success or failure. They could be according to the single ease question, how easy or difficult was it to complete that task? This is a question you would ask your users. It could be according to the system usability scale, which is a really common scale or scoring system as part of usability testing. You can look up more information about that. Or it could be according to a CSAT score, which is a customer satisfaction metric. You can also do these things through experience panels or through heuristic reviews. These would be like internal experts or internal folks who are, gauging the level of, how well your product or your experience like meets the criteria that you've already set up. So here's another real life scenario. Let's say you actually want to innovate and market and determine where you can differentiate from your competitors. So this is something I think that comes, like later in the process. These are for, sometimes for teams that have already launched an MVP that's doing really well. They don't understand like where do we go from here, or we've got a company, we're pretty established, but we'd like to scale up, or we'd like to, like find where our customers have more appetite. So as a research problem, you're trying to understand where your customers are underserved, not by you, but by the entire market, and also why they would even consider switching solutions from a competitor to your solution. So the answer here really is jobs to be done interviews, which we talked about earlier, as well as running a desired outcome survey to quantify the different themes. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. This is really a great way of figuring out, where your customers are underserved by your competitors. So if you can, one, in your qualitative job to be done interviews, identify those desired outcomes, like essentially how are customers measuring the success of your solution? How does your solution help them see progress or improvement in their lives? You can take those desired outcomes and you can quantify them in a much larger survey. So you can understand how this affects not just a small set of, your customers, but across, a larger set of your customer base. So we actually use a survey and scorecard for this. And you can get a sense of sort of how the results can be displayed over on the right here. You can view these in terms of, where customers are underserved, adequately served, and overserved by the market. So on the bottom, on the x-axis, you're looking at the importance of those desired outcomes for your customers. So customers are being asked, like, how important is this outcome for your daily work? And then on the left, on the y-axis, you're actually looking at what is their actual satisfaction with market solutions. So for that same outcome, customers are also being asked, like, tell us, how satisfied are you with, your set of solutions for this outcome. And so once you have those scores, you can actually put together this kind of map to see like where those things net out. So something that's underserved would essentially be very important. It would have a high importance score to the customer, but it would have a lower satisfaction level. So those are the things, if you can understand that, how your competitors are not serving, customers well, then that's an opportunity for your product or for your company to innovate. I would say too, like with desired outcomes, again, like multiple solutions for one outcome are okay. There's generally not one solution for a particular outcome. But once you understand where your customers are underserved, you can speak to them with their own words and their own desires. So, how this might look, here's an example on the bottom right, designed for developers: build more and spend less time managing your infrastructure is a good, that is a desired outcome that we've heard from our customers that we are, using in our marketing language here. And again, this is not, we didn't invent this method. There's quite a bit of information online from these different sources I have referenced here on the bottom of the slide, in terms of both jobs to be done and outcome-driven innovation. You can take a look if you need more info. So, thanks for sitting with me and listening to me chat about user research. What we did cover today is, we talked about easy research techniques for these scenarios, like 1, when you're not sure who your target users are, 2, when there's no consistent feedback, 3, when you need to prioritize the right features before you build. That was the Kano model, if you remember. And 4, when adoption was lower than you expected. We also talked about making sense of your research data in terms of both analysis and synthesis. And finally, we just covered a couple of advanced research methods. You guys are going to be experts after this. Now you're going to know everything that I know in terms of user research, how to use quality metrics to determine launch readiness, and how to innovate and differentiate from your competitors. There are some resources for learning more. These are some great books that I myself have used. Feel free to check these out. And finally, I hope you let user research help you create meaning for your customers. Thank you.
So first question to you, Colleen, how do you conduct a usability test? I know you said they could just watch Rafa's video, but can you give a quick overview of what people need to do? Can they run it in the background? Should they always ask customers for permission first, or if they're interested in participating, or can they just run it?
That's a great question. So usability testing is really a qualitative method for research. And yes, we always ask permission when we're going to run a usability test. So my team actually, will recruit whoever for a particular product, whoever the target customer is for each product or, experience. And we ask for permission, we send folks an invite, like a one-on-one invite, and then we always ask permission if we can record the session in advance before the session starts. So I would say for usability testing itself, it is critical that you ask permission because you're asking customers to walk through a particular task or through a particular workflow of your product. And you can also probe more deeply, like ask more questions as they're going through that task or that experience. So let's say you notice someone having trouble or difficulty as they're trying to accomplish something or trying to get something done. You can actually ask them, tell me more about what you're thinking, or what were you expecting to happen as you clicked that button. And that qualitative information is really what distinguishes a usability test from something else, like a quantitative method like A/B testing. So typically, A/B testing runs in the background, as people are interacting with a website. And for the most part, people do not opt in. You're just like the tools that folks are using nowadays for A/B testing. You either see one version of a user interface or you see another version, and you would never know if you're sort of grouped into an A/B test, into one version of an A/B test or another. But for usability testing, for sure, we always ask permission.
Great. What do you think about online focus groups versus in-person focus groups? This is pre-pandemic. Do you get topic results from them different than other techniques?
That's a good question. So I would say focus groups in general, they are a qualitative method. They are giving you a sense of what people think about your product or your brand. I would say in some ways, like the difference between the online focus group versus the in-person focus group, so let me just like walk through an example. When I've run in-person focus groups in the past, sometimes you find that it can be helpful to just get a general sense of opinions or perceptions of a concept or a topic. But in person, when you have folks sitting in the same room with each other, there's a lot of nuances and a lot of different, aspects of body language happening. And sometimes you find that there's like one person in the group who is, sort of dominant in their opinions and perspectives. And it's really important when you run a focus group that you want to make sure you're not just getting sort of like the majority perspective, but you're also understanding like what the shyer, quieter folks also think. So the way that I would design a focus group typically includes group activities as well as, you know, some sort of ideation activities, for the individuals, like before they share out with the group. And I do think that, online focus groups can be great for that, because you are not necessarily you're getting a lot of different opinions, and folks they're not necessarily influenced by other people in the group. So in some ways the online focus group could actually be a more effective method there.
Wonderful. Doesn't research increase our time to market by a lot? What does your process look like? How do I not waste time on this?
Great question. So this is something as a researcher that I've been dealing with for years and years and years now. So there are always really simple ways that you can incorporate research into your product development process so that it does not increase the time. um, if you have, even if you have just a couple of days that you can add to your timeline, you could do usability testing. If you only have a day, you could still do like what they call hallway testing or guerrilla testing. We always, like when we talk about usability testing, we say that like some testing is better than no testing. But user research is not just limited to usability. There are lots of different techniques or methods that you could do pretty quickly. An A/B test is one. Depending on the size of your audience, you could get results pretty quickly. You could also even just taking a look and doing some analysis of your engagement metrics or your web analytics as part of your discovery process. That could be a really easy way for you to incorporate, some data into your process, to see like what's happening with your customers now, and try to identify like what might happen if you changed the experience or added a new feature or a new product. Also, there's a technique we didn't really touch on, but it's called like a heuristic evaluation. And this is something that internal experts at your company, like subject matter experts, or even your UX design team or research team, could pretty easily do in just a day or half a day, where you're basically going through your new product or your potential product or feature, and you're evaluating against a set of usability heuristics or criteria. And there's, if you take Google search, like heuristic evaluation, you can definitely find some more info about that.
Great. What are your favorite A/B testing tools?
Well, I've used Optimizely at a few different companies. And there are lots of other A/B testing tools. I think I've also used Adobe Test and Target. I've also used, I think it's Maximizer. Sometimes A/B testing tools can be really heavy and really um, time consuming for your team to set up. So I would say it really depends on, what the needs of your team are and what your company needs are. If you need to maintain a lot of your customer data or host your own customer data rather than, letting it exist on the cloud somewhere, then that would play into, your tool decision. But in terms of like, an easier UI to use, I would say that Optimizely in the past has been a good tool for me.
How often do you typically ping a user that is part of a research group?
I wonder what
I
do we
think this person might be worried about pinging someone too often.
Okay, got it. Got it. Good. Also a good question. So yeah, we typically do not recruit users or participants for our studies more than once every 6 months. And the reason behind that is, because once somebody has participated too often or you've reached out to them too often with the same kinds of questions, they get accustomed to what you might ask, or they might start to anticipate, your question and behave in a way that's not entirely natural with the product. So that can sometimes happen with other techniques like expert panels or expert reviews if you reach out to those folks like too often. So for our team, we really try to avoid reaching out to someone who's already participated more than once every 6 months.
Great. How do you manage and maintain a pool of users by persona that you can use for your research?
Well, um, this is an interesting question because we've been talking a lot about personas lately and segmentation and segmenting your audience. And I think, you know, it involves a cross-functional effort. It's not just the research team or it's not just the UX team. If you're going to use personas and you're going to develop personas, they need to be done so that anyone across the company understands them and can utilize them and, can incorporate them into their process. Personas are one of those things that, I've seen other companies, they've been developed at other companies, and the team who develops it gets really excited about it, and no one uses it. No, like the engineering team, like they see it once and then they never think about it again. So you really need to plan for how to make them, useful and actionable by other teams. I think, reminding folks like pretty frequently, like I worked at a company once where we, always tried to have an empty seat in every meeting for the customer, or the persona. Like that would be one way to make it more actionable. But also, I think, getting buy-in from all of the stakeholders across your company about who your target customers are can really go a long way to identifying at the beginning of each product, who are we building this product for? Who are we serving here? So I would say that it's definitely a cross collaborative effort.
Awesome. Should split tests be considered two different MVPs, or do you consider different specific scenarios within the same MVP?
Mm, that's a good question. I would say I would not split scenarios by split tests because essentially you'd be splitting different use cases or different things. I mean, an A/B test or a split test, you're generally only modifying one thing. It would ultimately be tested with the same target audience who would have the same user context or the same, scenarios for using your product. So I would say that, you would only want to modify like one particular aspect of that test. Like an example would be like the value proposition, or it could be the appearance of a particular feature or button, or it could be certain copy or text.
Wonderful. I love how we're getting into the nitty gritty here. One last question. What about breakout rooms and online focus groups? Any recommendations for how we can make those happen?
Oh, sure. Well, I know that some tools actually do allow you to do breakout rooms. Like I know Zoom as a tool, actually there's a feature where you can like put people into a breakout room, and you can have them break out, do a particular exercise together as a group, and then you can bring them back to the main conference area. And then when you can also break them out again into the same groups later. So it's definitely possible with some tools. I would say if you're doing it manually, you'll need to be prepared way, way in advance if you're using other tools. So you'll just need to prepare with, what those links are and make sure that people are clear, like which room they're headed to. So, using the chat messaging or even like notifying people in advance, like at this time, we're going to ask you to break out into this other room, like sending that like way in advance can definitely help.
Awesome, thank you. And sorry to everyone that we went a little bit over, but we wanted to answer as many questions as we can here today. Thank you, Colleen, for sharing. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. Colleen, any parting thoughts or words of wisdom for our audience before we sign off today?
I would say that, figuring out which research method to use is sometimes the biggest challenge. And it all really comes down to like, what are the questions that you're trying to answer? That can really help you. And I showed the chart earlier in the presentation, which I think we're gonna share out. It's what figure out what question you're trying to answer and then choose your research techniques based on that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Colleen, again. And thank you, everyone, for joining. Let us know what you'd like to learn about next, and happy researching.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone. Bye.